90 miles. That's the distance between Key West, Florida and Cuba. And according to classified intelligence leaked directly to the press by senior Trump administration officials, Cuba now has more than 300 military drones pointed at us. At least that's what they want you to believe. And the question I'm asking that everyone should be asking loudly is, why is this administration handing classified intelligence to reporters right now anyway? What are they building toward? Who's benefiting from this? But just as we're locked in a ceasefire in one war, the Senate is already clearing the runway for the next one. And while all of that is happening, Trump's approval rating is now at its lowest point in his entire presidency. So stay with me while we're connecting these dots. This is the Quiet Lab, where we don't just cover the headlines, we connect the dots. And we have a lot of ground to cover tonight. 4 stories, all connected in my view, all happening right at this moment. So we're talking about a war that is kind of, ended, but we know it's not over. We're talking about the Iran war here, a Supreme Court decision that is quietly trying to dismantle the voting rights in real time, a president whose approval numbers are in free fall, and a growing escalation involving Cuba, drones, intelligence leaks, and the early architecture of public consent for possible military action. We're talking about a predicate being laid right now. So let's get into it. But first, if I can just ask you to like and subscribe, comment, and share this episode, this channel, join our quiet quorum, all right? Let's get into it. All right, so let's start with what was breaking this weekend, but it requires some context. So this weekend, Axios published an exclusive report bylined by Mark Caputo citing classified U.S. intelligence. Now, according to that report, Cuba has acquired more than 300 military drones and has discussed plans involving Guantanamo Bay, U.S. naval vessels, and potentially even Key West, Florida. All right, now before we go any further with that, let me just be honest with you first, because this is what the Quiet Loud is all about, okay? Connecting these dots, talking truthfully and straight about what's going on here as the facts and as I see it. So this intelligence was reportedly shared with Axios by a senior Trump administration official, and the report itself acknowledged that the information could be pretext for military action. All right, let's look at that again. The administration gave this information to the press, okay? And the same report warned it could help justify a war. I mean, I don't know about y'all, but I'm getting serious Russia-Ukraine vibes because they were dropping this predicate all along. Same thing happened. There was some stuff going on before they went into Venezuela. Same thing with Iran. But Reuters later picked up the story and noted that it could not independently verify these intelligence claims. So what do we actually know? That according to Axios, citing those Trump U.S. officials, Cuba has reportedly been purchasing drones from Russia and Iran since 2023 and deploying them at strategic locations around the island. And one official also claimed that Cuban officials recently approached Russia seeking additional military equipment. But overnight, Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel responded publicly himself. He insists that Cuba poses no threat and has no aggressive intentions toward any country. Now, here's what's important to remember, because Cuba is denying aggressive intent, but notably, they are not explicitly denying the existence of these drones themselves, and that distinction matters. But then Diaz-Canel escalated the rhetoric even further, warning that U.S. military aggression against Cuba would trigger what he called a, quote, bloodbath with incalculable consequences. Now, that is significant escalation in language, but now we need to connect those dots, because the Republican-led Senate already voted 51-47 to block a resolution requiring congressional approval before Trump could use any military force against Cuba. So that runway is already clear. All right. And Trump himself recently suggested that the U.S. could take control of Cuba, quote, almost immediately after, quote, finishing the job in Iran, whenever that is. He even joked about parking the USS Abraham Lincoln roughly 100 yards off Cuba's coast. Now, look, Cuba acquiring drones from Russia or Iran, that's a legitimate national security concern, right? Okay, I'm not dismissing anything like that at all. But what I am asking you to do is to hold two truths at the same time, okay? That the threat could be real, all right? But this administration has a documented pattern of selectively releasing intelligence at politically convenient moments, okay, to shape public opinion before any kind of major action occurs. We've seen this before, and not for nothing, due to Trump and those blockades kind of locking Cuba out of any trade. They're running out of energy. They're facing an energy crisis right now. They're rolling blackouts right now. So if they can barely keep the lights on in their own country, Are they going to be some threat to this country here? I just don't see it. No, but what we can say that the timing here is hard to ignore because the leak came just days after CIA Director John Ratcliffe traveled to Havana and just before the Justice Department is reportedly preparing an indictment involving former Cuban leadership, Raul Castro. These aren't random events in my point of view. This is a coordinated rollout. And that timing tells the story. But we'll keep watching on this one closely, okay? And keep asking that question that matters the most. Who's benefiting from this? Why are they doing this? All right, so let's talk about Iran since we're talking about military action right now. Because even though we've been hearing the word ceasefire, that situation is far from over. This so-called Operation Epic Fury, the joint U.S.-Israeli military campaign, officially ran from February 28th through May 5th. And that's just officially beyond that point, you need congressional approval. So now they're trying to play it down again as, oh, is it a war? Is it a conflict? A ceasefire? Blah, blah, blah. Okay. But this conflict, this war, has already left thousands dead, millions displaced, and global shipping routes severely disrupted, especially around the Strait of Hormuz. Everybody knows the Strait of Hormuz now, one of the most important oil choke points on Earth. And Iran controls it right now. And they may always control it. Who knows? But the situation today is even more unstable than it was yesterday. Iran is now demanding $270 billion in reparations and reconstruction payments, calling compensation the only path toward ending the conflict permanently. Meanwhile, the strait remains effectively blocked in a dangerous standoff with both sides maintaining pressure and partial blockades. Let's be serious here. But Trump responded to Iran's latest negotiating proposal by calling it totally unacceptable and stupid. I mean, so grown up. Okay, so diplomatic. And according to new reporting, factions inside the Pentagon are now split. All right, some officials are pushing for renewed targeted strikes while others are trying to preserve diplomacy before the entire situation spirals again. I mean, we need cooler heads right now. This situation is not going to get better with late night tweets. All right. But we're not looking at stability here. We're looking at a ceasefire that's hanging by a thread. And as of this morning, stocks are falling again and the oil prices are climbing again after Trump warned that Iran's clock is ticking. And here's the dot you need to connect in your own life. The Iran conflict became one of the biggest single drivers of Trump's economic collapse. It surged gas prices. It made energy costs go up, shipping costs astronomical. All right. And suddenly the people across America were paying more for groceries and utilities, transportation, everyday life itself. All right? This wasn't some abstract foreign policy stunt. This came back home to us. We're all facing it and dealing with it. And now, with Cuba entering the conversation, the same pattern is beginning to emerge again. Military escalation, economic disruption, and ordinary people absorbing the cost while these politicians talk about strength and dominance. Because people don't vote on foreign policy speeches, they vote on how they feel. So we don't need the polls to tell us that life feels expensive or whose fault it is. All right? Now, I need you to pay very close attention to this next story because it may be the most consequential of this episode. The Supreme Court ruled 6-3 in the Louisiana decision, which I'm sure some of you or most of you hopefully are starting to hear and start to understand, striking down a congressional map containing 2 black majority districts. Now, this ruling dealt a major blow to Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And the court didn't even wait. It allowed the ruling to take effect immediately, bypassing the standard 32-day waiting period. So what happens next? It's happening really fast. In Alabama, primaries that were literally scheduled for Tuesday of this week are now being pushed to August in affected districts, while maps are redrawn right now in real time. In Louisiana, officials already suspended May primaries after ballots had begun already kind of coming in. So this is not theoretical anymore. Elections are literally being paused and redrawn in real time. Tennessee's Republican governor signed a map targeting the state's only Democratic congressman. Florida moved aggressively on another contested map already facing lawsuits. And now the Virginia Supreme Court has struck down Democratic-backed redistricting plan that voters approved just last month, wiping out what would have been 4 Democratic pickup opportunities. All right? They're playing dirty. They're outright stealing right now. But meanwhile, the Cook Political Report estimates Republicans could gain as many as 12 seats nationally from redistricting changes alone. Voting rights advocates estimate that close to 200 Democratic held state legislative seats, many representing black communities in the South, could now be vulnerable. So let's say that again, that's 200 seats. Many of them represent black communities. We're talking about state legislative seats, about state house, the people who control these maps in the first place. Now, some people will say, come on, man, that's just politics as usual. To which I would say, look at the patterns. We've been talking about this the whole time, connecting these dots. Look at the patterns. This ruling happens, okay? The waiting period, the 32-day waiting period gets skipped over. Republican legislatures start moving within days with bills that, if we looked at them with a magnifying glass, would probably look identical. In the same way, all of the fake electors were trying to get themselves into the certification process. They were all basically using a form document. I bet you something like that had been passed around with the proper language to kind of just go ahead and push this thing through your state legislature. So these maps are redrawn in the middle of an election cycle, and the districts being targeted overwhelmingly affect black representation, Democratic constituencies, and urban voting power. U.S. Representative Jamie Raskin argued that this has less to do with constitutional interpretation and more to do with securing long-term structural power. Now, you don't have to agree with his conclusion on this, but you do have to acknowledge, like I said, the timing, because this is not happening in a vacuum. Brookings Institute has already noted something fascinating, that this strategy could still backfire. Packing Democratic voters too aggressively could unintentionally spread Democratic influence into surrounding areas during a really strong turnout year. And make no mistake, this is going to be a strong turnout year. The polls are so heavily against Trump and Republicans right now that they have to resort to stealing, okay? That's what we're seeing right now. Here's the reality. They know they couldn't win the voters, so they moved the lines. And the highest court in the land just handed them the ability to do so. So let's bring all of this together, because Cuba, Iran, voting rights, redistricting, approval numbers, they're not all separate stories. Like I said before, I see this as one story. All right. And as of today, Trump's net approval rating hit a second term low, 35%. And his approval specifically on inflation and the cost of living dropping dramatically, even lower. I mean, over his presidency is down negative 41.8 points. The numbers are moving so fast that analysts say that they've literally had to keep rescaling the charts. Nate Silver's silver bullet said he had to keep lowering the y-axis just to allow these dips to keep happening over the last few months. And a brand new New York Times Siena poll release found that 69% of independents now disapprove of Trump, even among Republicans. Dissatisfaction over inflation is sharply climbing. And this matters because inflation and foreign conflict are no longer abstract political issues. They're shaping our lives right now. People are feeling this every day on every little thing we do. And there's another number worth paying attention to. Democratic voters are currently significantly more motivated heading into the midterms than Republican voters. That's not just the polling that we see here. That's the political weather. You can see that. You can feel that in the air. But here's the wrinkle. Republicans may enter this election cycle with significant structural advantages built directly into the maps themselves. New district lines in Tennessee, Florida, Alabama, and potentially in Georgia and South Carolina, who's seemingly put their redistricting off for the 2028 cycle. All this could offset Democratic enthusiasm before any votes are even cast. And Brookings Institute notes that even a major Democratic national swing may produce fewer gains than expected because competitive districts have begun to shrink dramatically. But there are other major developments happening in the background right now. Senate Republicans are beginning work this week on a new $70 billion Reconciliation 2.0 package focused heavily on ICE and CBP funding. The goal is reportedly to move it through the Senate and toward final passage by June 1st. And Trump's DOJ is setting up what looks like a $1.7 billion slush fund to compensate Trump allies like the J6 criminals. Yeah, even those that have probably been reconvicted of some other crime might be eligible to still get a payment from this, as evidenced by Acting Attorney General Todd Blanchard's awful cross-exams during these Senate hearings. It's been terrible. So while Americans are dealing with rising costs and unstable global conflicts and fights over voting rights, Washington is simultaneously preparing another massive domestic security and immigration spending push headed directly into the midterms. So here's the story we've got. We've got a president in freefall. We've got an election about 6 months away, and simultaneous efforts through courts, maps, leaks from the Trump administration, strategic leaks probably, congressional maneuvering, controlled narratives, all of this to reshape the field of play before November even arrives. And that's why all of these stories matter together. Okay? So I want to leave you with this. There's an issue in this country where headlines become so constant, so exhausting, that people eventually stop paying attention to them, where the chaos becomes background noise, where the abnormal starts to feel normal. But that exhaustion can be a political strategy too, and that's why staying engaged matters so much. That's why asking questions matter. That's why connecting these dots and stories and headlines and policies and all of these things together matters, especially when maps are being redrawn and intelligence is being strategically leaked as a predicate for some kind of military activity we don't even know of. And powerful people are counting on the public to become so tired, so fatigued on this, to follow the story all the way through. But we know here, the Quiet Quorum isn't gonna tune out. We're gonna tune in, we're gonna stay grounded, we're gonna stay skeptical of what we hear out here that sounds crazy, and we're gonna keep watching the moves as they happen, because right now, the moves are already being made. All right? So please, once again, I'm going to ask you to like, subscribe, comment, and share. Please join our Quiet Quorum and tell somebody about this episode. And as always, stay grounded, stay informed, and stay loud quietly. This is The Quiet Loud. Y'all take care.